So this happened 3 months ago, and I'm still processing it. I thought I knew everything about my fiancée Sarah after 4 years together. We had the perfect relationship, or so I believed. She was planning this elaborate Vegas bachelorette party with her college friends, and honestly, I was a little hurt. She didn't want me involved at all. She said it was girls only, no exceptions. I respected that boundary, even though it stung. Then at 2 a.m. on the night of her party, I got tagged in a social media photo that changed everything. There she was, arm around some guy I'd never seen before, looking way too comfortable. My stomach dropped. That photo led me down a rabbit hole that revealed she'd been living a complete double life for months. So I'm Michael, 31, finance analyst. I work for this mid-sized investment firm downtown, and honestly, my life was pretty predictable before all this went down. Wake up at 6, gym, coffee, spreadsheets, home by 7. Sarah and I had been together since college, engaged for 8 months, and I thought we were solid. She worked in marketing for a tech startup and traveled a lot for work, which I never questioned because I trusted her completely. The week before her bachelorette party, she seemed different though. More secretive with her phone, taking calls in the other room, staying late at the office more often. When I asked about it, she said work was just crazy with some big product launch. I believed her because why wouldn't I? We were getting married in 2 weeks. She left for Vegas on Friday morning with 6 of her college friends. I helped her pack and drove her to the airport. She seemed excited but also nervous, which I figured was normal pre-wedding jitters. She kissed me goodbye and promised to call when they landed. That was the last normal moment we had together. I spent Friday night at home, ordered pizza, watched some Netflix. Around midnight, I started wondering how their night was going, but didn't want to be that clingy fiancé who checks in constantly. I figured no news was good news. Boy, was I wrong about that. Saturday night, I was at home grading some financial reports when my phone buzzed with a notification. Someone had tagged me in a photo on Instagram. I almost ignored it because I'm not really active on social media, but something made me check. The photo was from some trendy Vegas bar with neon lights and crowded tables. There was Sarah, right in the center, wearing this tight black dress I'd never seen before. But what made my blood run cold was the guy next to her. His arm was around her waist, and she was leaning into him like they were together. Really together. I stared at the photo for maybe 10 minutes, zooming in, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The guy looked maybe late 20s, athletic build, definitely not one of her college friends. Sarah was laughing at something he was saying, and her body language was all wrong. This wasn't how you act around a stranger you just met. The photo had been posted by someone named Jessica, who I recognized as one of Sarah's college roommates. The caption read something like with a bunch of party emojis. But there were only 4 other women in the photo, not the 6 Sarah had told me were going on the trip. I immediately tried calling Sarah, but it went straight to voicemail. Then I tried texting her, asking how the night was going and if she was having fun. No response. I waited 20 minutes and tried calling again. Voicemail. My mind started racing with possible explanations. Maybe it was just some random guy who photobombed their picture. Maybe Jessica's boyfriend had flown out to surprise her and brought a friend. Maybe I was overreacting to what was probably nothing. But deep down, I knew something was off. Sarah's expression in that photo wasn't the face of someone who was uncomfortable with unwanted attention. She looked happy, relaxed, like she belonged exactly where she was. I spent the next hour scrolling through the other photos from the night. There were several more with the same guy, always close to Sarah, always looking way too comfortable together. In one photo, they were sharing a drink. In another, his hand was on her lower back as they walked through the casino. The worst part was how natural it all looked. Like this wasn't their first time together. Like this was normal for them. I tried calling 2 more times before giving up. Either her phone was dead, or she was ignoring me on purpose. Neither option made me feel better about what I'd seen. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that photo. Sarah's laugh. The way she fit perfectly under that guy's arm. How comfortable they looked together. By 4 a.m., I was wide awake, pacing around our apartment, trying to convince myself I was being paranoid. But I wasn't paranoid. I was right to be suspicious, and I was about to prove it. I remembered Sarah mentioning they were staying at the Bellagio. She'd shown me the group chat where they'd all agreed on the hotel. I also remembered her being weird about the booking process, insisting she'd handle all the arrangements herself instead of letting me help like I usually did with our travel plans. Around 6 a.m. Vegas time, I called the Bellagio. I told them I was trying to reach my fiancée, Sarah Mitchell, and asked if they could connect me to her room. The woman on the phone was polite, but said she couldn't give out room information for security reasons. I explained that I was her fiancé, and we were getting married in 2 weeks, but she still wouldn't budge. Then I had an idea. I asked if they had any reservations under my name, Michael Torres, thinking maybe Sarah had booked everything under my credit card like she sometimes did. The woman put me on hold for what felt like forever. When she came back, she said they didn't have any reservations under my name, but they did have one under Sarah Mitchell. Just one reservation. For one night. Checked in Friday, checking out Sunday. That's when it hit me. If there were 6 women on this trip, like Sarah had told me, why was there only one reservation under her name? Where were the others staying? I thanked the woman and hung up, my hands shaking. Something was definitely wrong here. I tried calling Sarah again, and again it went straight to voicemail. This time I left a message asking her to call me back as soon as possible because I was worried about her. Then I did something I'd never done before in our 4-year relationship. I logged into our shared bank account online to check our recent transactions. What I found there made everything worse. There was a charge from the Bellagio for 2 nights, not one like the woman on the phone had said. But more concerning was another charge from the same hotel on the same day. A second room, also for 2 nights, also under Sarah's name. 2 rooms, both paid for with our joint credit card, both under her name. I printed out the bank statement and stared at the charges. Room 1247 and room 1853. 2 different rooms, booked at the same time, for the same dates. Why would Sarah need 2 rooms for a girls' trip? Unless it wasn't just a girls' trip. By Sunday morning, I was a complete mess. I'd been up all night, alternating between calling Sarah and staring at those bank charges. She finally answered around 10 a.m., sounding groggy and annoyed. I asked her how the trip was going, and she said it was fine, just tired from staying up late. Her voice sounded off, though, like she was being careful about what she said. I asked if she'd gotten my messages, and she claimed her phone had been acting up, losing signal in the casino. Then I asked about the hotel situation. I told her I'd been worried when I couldn't reach her, so I called the Bellagio to make sure she was okay. I mentioned that they'd told me about her reservation and asked why there was only one room booked for 6 people. There was this long pause. Then Sarah said the other girls had booked their own rooms separately, and she'd just gotten a single for herself because she wanted some quiet space to decompress before the wedding. It sounded reasonable, but something in her tone made me doubt it. I didn't mention the second room charge. I wanted to see if she'd volunteer that information herself. She didn't. We talked for maybe 10 more minutes about random stuff, but the whole conversation felt forced and weird. She kept saying she had to go because the girls were waiting for brunch, but I could hear music and voices in the background that sounded more like a party than a quiet hotel room. After we hung up, I made a decision that I'm still not sure was right or wrong. I booked a last-minute flight to Vegas. I told myself I was just being a concerned fiancé who wanted to surprise his bride-to-be. But really, I knew I was going there to catch her in whatever she was hiding from me. The flight was expensive and I had to call in sick to work on Monday, but I needed to know the truth. I landed in Vegas around 3 p.m. and took a cab straight to the Bellagio. My plan was simple. Find Sarah, see what was really going on, and hopefully discover that I'd been worrying about nothing. The hotel was massive and crowded with weekend tourists. I went to the front desk and asked if they could tell me which room Sarah Mitchell was in. Same response as when I'd called. They couldn't give out that information. But I had the room numbers from the bank statement. 1247 and 1853. I took the elevator to the 12th floor first. Room 1247 was at the end of a long hallway. I stood outside the door for maybe 5 minutes, trying to work up the courage to knock. What would I say? How would I explain showing up unannounced? Before I could decide, the door to room 1853 opened down the hall. I quickly ducked around the corner and watched as Sarah walked out, followed by the same guy from the Instagram photo. They were both dressed casually, like they'd just woken up. He had his hand on her lower back as they walked toward the elevators, and Sarah was laughing at something he'd said. They looked like a couple. They looked comfortable together in a way that made my stomach turn. I followed them at a distance as they went down to the casino floor. They sat at a blackjack table together, and I watched from across the room as they played. He would whisper things in her ear that made her smile. She would touch his arm when she laughed. Everything about their body language screamed intimacy. This wasn't some random guy she'd just met. This was someone she knew well, someone she was comfortable with, someone she was cheating on me with. I spent the next hour following them around the casino like some kind of stalker. I felt sick about it, but I needed to see more. I needed to be absolutely sure of what I was witnessing before I did anything I couldn't take back. They went to dinner at one of the hotel restaurants. I sat 3 tables away and watched them share appetizers and feed each other bites of their entrees. The way she looked at him across the table was the same way she used to look at me when we first started dating. Like he was the only person in the room. Around 9 p.m., they went back upstairs. I waited in the hallway for 20 minutes, but they didn't come back out. I finally worked up the courage to knock on room 1853. Sarah answered the door in a hotel bathrobe, and the look on her face when she saw me was pure panic. For about 3 seconds, neither of us said anything. Then she stepped into the hallway and closed the door behind her. She asked what I was doing there, and I told her I'd been worried when I couldn't reach her, so I decided to fly out and surprise her. She said that was sweet but completely unnecessary, and that I should have called first. I asked who was in the room with her. She said it was just Jessica, that they were getting ready to go out with the other girls. I asked why she was staying in a different room from her friends, and she gave me the same story about wanting quiet space. Then I asked about the guy from the photos. I told her I'd seen the Instagram posts and was curious who he was. Sarah's face went completely white. She said he was just some guy they'd met at the bar, that Jessica's boyfriend had brought him along, and that it wasn't a big deal. But her hands were shaking as she said it, and she wouldn't make eye contact with me. Every instinct I had was screaming that she was lying. I told her I loved her and just wanted to make sure everything was okay between us before the wedding. She said of course everything was okay, that I was being paranoid and jealous for no reason. She said the stress of the wedding was making me imagine problems that didn't exist. For a moment, I almost believed her. Sarah had always been good at making me doubt my own perceptions when we argued. She had this way of turning things around so that I ended up apologizing for being unreasonable. But then the door behind her opened slightly, and I heard a man's voice asking if everything was all right. Sarah quickly pushed the door closed and told me she really needed to get back to Jessica, who wasn't feeling well. I knew there was no Jessica in that room. I knew Sarah was lying to my face about everything. But I also knew that confronting her right then, in a hotel hallway in Vegas, wasn't going to end well for either of us. So I told her I'd get my own room for the night, and we could talk more in the morning. She seemed relieved and said that sounded like a good plan. She kissed my cheek and went back into the room, locking the door behind her. I got a room on a different floor and spent the night staring at the ceiling, trying to figure out what to do next. The next morning, I met Sarah and 3 of her friends for brunch at a restaurant in the hotel. The other 2 friends from the original group were mysteriously absent, which confirmed my suspicion that this hadn't really been a 6-person trip. Sarah was acting completely normal, chatting about the wedding plans and laughing with her friends like nothing had happened. But I noticed she kept checking her phone every few minutes and seemed distracted. I tried to bring up the guy from the photos again, asking Jessica directly about her boyfriend and his friend. Jessica looked confused and said her boyfriend hadn't come to Vegas, that it was just a girl's trip. Then she caught Sarah's eye and quickly changed the subject. The whole brunch felt like a performance. Sarah's friends kept steering the conversation away from anything related to the previous night, and Sarah herself seemed to be working overtime to act normal and loving toward me. After we finished eating, Sarah said she needed to go back to her room to pack and check out. She suggested I head to the airport early since I had a flight that afternoon, and that she'd see me back home that evening. I agreed, but instead of going to the airport, I went back to my room and called my best friend Jake. I told him everything that had happened and asked if he thought I was losing my mind. Jake was quiet for a long time after I finished talking. Then he said something that made my blood run cold. He said the guy in the Instagram photos looked familiar, that he thought he might have seen him before. I asked him where, and Jake said he wasn't sure, but he thought it might have been at our engagement party 8 months ago. He said there had been this guy there who seemed to know Sarah really well, but when Jake had asked me about him, I'd said I had no idea who he was. Jake said he'd thought it was weird at the time, but hadn't wanted to cause drama by bringing it up. Now he was wondering if it was the same person. I asked Jake to look through his photos from the engagement party to see if he could find any pictures of this guy. While he was looking, I told him about the hotel room charges and everything I'd witnessed the night before. 20 minutes later, Jake called me back. He'd found a photo from the engagement party with the same guy in the background. He was talking to Sarah near the bar, and they looked very comfortable together. Jake said he'd also found the guy's social media profile through some mutual friends. His name was David Chun. He worked in marketing for a different tech company. And according to his Instagram, he'd been posting photos from Vegas all weekend too, including several that showed him at the same places Sarah had been. Jake sent me screenshots of David's posts, and my heart sank. There were photos of him at the same blackjack table where I'd seen him with Sarah. Photos of him at the same restaurant where they'd had dinner. And most damning of all, a photo of him in what was clearly a hotel room, with Sarah's purse visible on the nightstand in the background. The timeline was becoming clear. Sarah and David had been seeing each other for months, probably since our engagement party. The Vegas trip wasn't a bachelorette party at all. It was a romantic getaway that she'd disguised as a girl's trip to throw me off the scent. I flew back home that afternoon in a complete daze. Part of me wanted to confront Sarah immediately, but another part of me hoped there was still some innocent explanation for everything I'd seen and discovered. Sarah got home around 10 p.m., full of stories about her amazing weekend with the girls. She showed me souvenirs she'd bought and talked about all the fun they'd had. Watching her lie so easily to my face was almost more painful than discovering the affair itself. We were supposed to have dinner with both sets of parents the next night to finalize some last-minute wedding details. I spent the whole day going back and forth about whether to say something or wait until after I'd gathered more evidence. Jake kept texting me updates about what he'd found on David's social media. Apparently, David had been posting subtle hints about a secret relationship for months. Photos of 2 wine glasses at romantic restaurants. Pictures of flowers with captions like hotel room photos from various cities where Sarah had claimed to be traveling for work. The evidence was overwhelming, but I still felt like I needed one more piece of proof before I could bring myself to blow up our entire relationship and upcoming wedding. That proof came during dinner with our parents. We were at this nice Italian restaurant, talking about seating arrangements and last-minute RSVPs. Sarah's mom was going through the guest list when she mentioned that someone named David Chun had RSVP'd yes, but she didn't recognize the name. Sarah's face went completely pale. She said she thought David was someone's plus one, maybe from my side of the family. But I knew exactly who David Chun was, and he definitely wasn't on our guest list. I excused myself to go to the bathroom and called Jake. I asked him to send me the screenshots of David's text messages that he'd managed to find through a mutual friend's phone. Jake had been reluctant to share them earlier because they were pretty explicit, but I told him I needed to see them. The messages were from just 2 days ago, while Sarah was supposed to be in Vegas with her girlfriends. David was telling her how much he missed her and couldn't wait to see her again. Sarah was responding with messages about how hard it was to keep lying to me and how guilty she felt, but that she wasn't ready to leave me yet. The most damning message was from Sarah, sent the morning after I'd surprised her in Vegas. She told David that I'd shown up unexpectedly, but that she'd managed to convince me nothing was going on. She said we needed to be more careful because the wedding was only 2 weeks away. I screenshot everything Jake sent me and went back to the dinner table. My hands were shaking as I sat down, and I could barely focus on the conversation happening around me. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I pulled out my phone and showed Sarah the screenshots of David's messages. I asked her if she wanted to explain what they meant. The silence that followed was deafening. Both sets of parents were staring at us in confusion, not understanding what they were looking at. Sarah was staring at the phone screen like she'd seen a ghost. Then she tried to play it off. She said David was just a friend who had a crush on her, that the messages didn't mean anything, and that I was taking them out of context. She said I was being paranoid and jealous, just like in Vegas. But I was done being gaslight. I pulled out the printed bank statement showing the 2 hotel room charges and placed it on the table next to the phone. I told everyone exactly what I'd discovered over the weekend and what I'd witnessed in Vegas. The aftermath was immediate and brutal. Sarah's parents started yelling at me for spying on their daughter and accused me of trying to sabotage the wedding out of cold feet. My parents were trying to calm everyone down and figure out what was really going on. Sarah was crying and insisting that I was blowing everything out of proportion, that David was just a friend, and that the hotel rooms were booked separately for privacy reasons. She begged me not to ruin our relationship over a misunderstanding. But then my phone rang. It was Jake, and he sounded urgent. He said David Chun had just posted something on social media that I needed to see immediately. I put the call on speaker so everyone could hear. Jake said David had apparently found out about our dinner confrontation somehow, and had decided to come clean publicly. He'd posted a long message on Instagram apologizing to me and explaining that he and Sarah had been in a relationship for 8 months. According to David's post, Sarah had told him that we were broken up and that the wedding was just a business arrangement to keep our families happy. He said he'd only recently discovered that wasn't true and that he felt terrible about being part of a deception. The post included photos of him and Sarah together over the past several months, including some very intimate ones that made it clear they'd been sleeping together. He'd tagged both Sarah and me in the post, which meant all of our mutual friends and family members would see it. Sarah grabbed my phone and stared at David's post in horror. She tried to claim that he was lying, that he was some kind of stalker who'd been harassing her, but the photos told a different story. These weren't the photos of a stalker. They were the photos of a couple in love. Her parents were now yelling at her instead of me, demanding to know what was going on. My parents were asking if we needed to cancel the wedding. The restaurant staff was starting to stare at our table because of all the commotion. Sarah finally broke down and admitted that she'd been seeing David, but she insisted it had only been going on for a few weeks and that she'd been planning to end it after the wedding. She said she loved me and wanted to marry me, and that David was just a mistake. But I knew that wasn't true. The evidence showed they'd been together for months, not weeks. The hotel receipts, the Instagram photos, the text messages, everything pointed to a long-term affair that had been going on since our engagement party. I told Sarah that the wedding was off and that I'd be moving out of our apartment as soon as possible. She begged me to reconsider, saying we could work through this with counseling, but I was done. The trust was completely broken. Even if I could eventually forgive the affair, I couldn't forgive the elaborate deception. The fake bachelorette party, the lies about work trips, the gaslighting when I tried to express my concerns, it was all too much. The next few weeks were a blur of canceled wedding plans and awkward conversations with friends and family. Sarah had moved back in with her parents, and I was staying in our old apartment trying to figure out how to rebuild my life. The hardest part wasn't even the betrayal itself. It was realizing how long I'd been living in a fantasy. Looking back, there had been signs for months that I'd either ignored or explained away. The late nights at work, the secretive phone calls, the way she'd become distant and distracted. I kept replaying moments from our relationship, wondering what had been real and what had been performance. Had she ever really loved me? Or had I just been convenient while she figured out what she really wanted? Jake was incredible during this time. He came over almost every night to make sure I was eating and sleeping. He helped me cancel the wedding vendors and return the gifts that had already arrived. Most importantly, he listened when I needed to talk and gave me space when I needed to be alone. About 3 weeks after everything fell apart, Sarah showed up at the apartment. She said she'd ended things with David and wanted to try to work things out with me. She claimed that the affair had been a mistake brought on by pre-wedding anxiety, and that she realized now that I was the one she really wanted to be with. I asked her why she'd lied about so many things, and she said she'd been afraid of hurting me. She said the deception had spiraled out of control, and she hadn't known how to come clean without destroying our relationship. But that was exactly the problem. She'd been more concerned about protecting herself than about being honest with me. Even now, she was trying to minimize what had happened and make it sound like a temporary lapse in judgment rather than months of calculated deception. I told her I needed more time to process everything. But honestly, I already knew it was over. The person I'd fallen in love with either didn't exist or had changed into someone I didn't recognize. Either way, I couldn't build a marriage on that foundation. Sarah cried and begged me to reconsider, but I could see in her eyes that part of her was relieved. I think she'd been feeling trapped by our relationship for a while, and the affair with David had been her way of exploring what else was out there without having to make a clean break. In a weird way, I was almost grateful to David for posting that Instagram confession. Without that, Sarah might have kept lying indefinitely, and I might have married someone who was living a double life. It's been about 6 months since everything happened, and I'm finally starting to feel like myself again. I moved to a new apartment across town and started seeing a therapist to work through the trust issues and self-doubt that came from being deceived so thoroughly. The hardest thing has been learning to trust my own instincts again. For months after the breakup, I second-guessed every feeling and observation, wondering if I was being paranoid or reading too much into innocent situations. My therapist helped me understand that what happened with Sarah wasn't about me being naive or missing obvious signs. She was actively working to deceive me, using my trust and love against me to maintain her double life. That's not something you can protect yourself against just by being more suspicious or vigilant. I've started dating again, which feels weird and scary. I met someone named Lisa through a mutual friend, and we've been seeing each other for about 2 months. She's nothing like Sarah, more straightforward, less dramatic, genuinely interested in building something honest and real. But I still catch myself looking for signs of deception that probably aren't there. When Lisa's phone buzzes during dinner, I wonder who's texting her. When she mentions a male coworker, I find myself asking more questions than I probably should. Lisa has been patient with my trust issues, but I know it's not fair to make her pay for Sarah's mistakes. That's something I'm still working on in therapy. I ran into Sarah a few weeks ago at a coffee shop downtown. She looked good, happy even. We made small talk for a few minutes, and she mentioned that she was seeing someone new. Not David. Apparently that ended badly after his public confession, but someone else from her work. Part of me wanted to warn this new guy about what he was getting into, but I realized that wasn't my responsibility anymore. Sarah's relationship patterns are her problem to solve, not mine. The weirdest thing about seeing her was realizing that I didn't feel angry anymore. I felt sad for what we'd lost, and sad for the person I'd thought she was, but I wasn't angry. Maybe that's what healing looks like. Epilogue. Looking back now, I can see that discovering Sarah's affair was probably the best thing that could have happened to me, even though it didn't feel that way at the time. If David hadn't posted that Instagram confession, I might have married someone who was fundamentally dishonest and spent years trying to build a life with someone who wasn't fully committed to our relationship. The whole experience taught me that trust isn't just about believing someone won't cheat on you. It's about believing they'll be honest with you about their feelings, their struggles, and their doubts. Sarah couldn't do that, and that would have made for a miserable marriage regardless of whether she'd continued the affair. I'm in a much better place now, both emotionally and practically. The new apartment is smaller than the one Sarah and I shared, but it feels more like home because it's entirely mine. I've reconnected with friends I'd lost touch with during the relationship, and I've discovered interests and hobbies that I'd put aside to focus on wedding planning. Most importantly, I've learned to trust myself again. When something feels off in a relationship now, I don't immediately assume I'm being paranoid or jealous. I pay attention to that feeling and communicate about it directly. It's a healthier way to live, even if it sometimes means having difficult conversations. The wedding we'd planned would have cost about $30,000. Instead, I used that money to take a month-long trip to Europe by myself. It was the first time I'd traveled alone, and it was exactly what I needed to remember who I was outside of that relationship. Sometimes the best adventures come from the worst situations.